In this section, we are going to create the UI nodes for our game. We're going to start off and discuss what kind of nodes we are going to create. Then, we are going to create each UI node with the correct text and buttons. We're also going to ensure each button has a pressable node attached. Now let's go ahead and jump right in. This here is all the UI we are going to create. It's going to consist of 4 different UI nodes. The first one here on the left is going to consist of the start screen. This of course is going to have the title of the game and the play button. The second one is going to be the ship selection page, where you can go ahead and select between the first ship, second, and third. We're also going to have a ship image, and it's going to change depending on which one you select. For the next page, it's going to be the in-game UI. Now the only UI button that's going to be present in the in-game UI is simply the mute button at the top left corner. The final UI is going to be the game over screen. Once you run out of health and you are in the game over state, the text of game over is going to appear, and we're also going to have a button to send us back to the main menu. Alright, let's get started creating that UI. So first thing we're going to do is create a main node for the UI. So let's right click on our main node, add child node, look for that node 2D, go ahead, select it, and hit create. Let's rename it all lowercase UI. Now, before we start creating those screens, we don't necessarily want them to create them inside of a node 2D, because the scaling will be kind of messed up and it won't scale with our screen size. But there's a very easy way we can do that by adding it to another type of node. So we'll do add node 2D on top of our node UI, and we're going to look for something called a canvas layer. Now this canvas layer is great for creating UIs because it acts as kind of like a forefront, and it will scale to whatever our specific screen size is. So let's go ahead and add that. Now we don't need to stretch it out or anything, it'll automatically work. Now we can go ahead and create those nodes that are going to represent each screen. So let's right click on our canvas layer, add child node, and we're simply going to add a node 2D. Now for this node 2D, this will be our start screen. So start screen. Let's create the next one. Control D, change the name, choose screen. Let's do the next one. Select it, Control D, change the name, in-game screen. Then our last screen, let's select this one, Control D, change the name to game over screen. And there we go. All right, let's start off with the start screen. So for the start screen, we're simply going to need that title, a little sprite image of the ship, and a play button. Let's start off with that text. That's going to be the title. To add some text, we're going to right click on start screen, add child node, and use something called a label. Label helps us add UI text into the game. Now we do need to stretch this one out. I'm simply going to grab it, holding down Control, and make it snap to the other side and move it to somewhere about here. Let's put in some text over here on the inspector. I'm going to do space, shooter, game. Now, as you can see though, it's not exactly positioned correctly and a little too small. So let's go ahead and position it using the horizontal align, change that from left to center, change the vertical alignment from top to center as well. And there we go, now it's nice and centered. But it's still a little small, and I don't exactly like the default font. But we can change that pretty easily by selecting the label settings. Currently it's empty, so we're going to select it, new label settings. Then select it again, and you'll get a drop down where you can edit the font, outline, shadow, and resource. Let's start off with the font itself. Now our current font is set to default, so we need to drag and drop the specific font we want to use. If we go to our asset pack inside of our art folder, the Kenny Space Shooter one, go into that, go to the bonus, you're going to see we have some default fonts here. Now I'm going to take this top one here and drag and drop it into this right here. Now it's still a little small, so what we could do is increase the size, which is right under it. Let's simply change that to something like 75. We can always adjust it if it's too big. This one I think is a little big, but there's also another issue, is it's not exactly fitting in that box we originally had. Now there's a reason why it's doing that, so let's Control Z to go back real quick. It's because we never set our auto wrap mode on. Currently it's set to off. We want to set that to the word. So now though, if we do that same thing, make the size set to something bigger like 75, it'll auto wrap just like that. Now I still think that's a little too big for our game. I want Space Shooter to be on the same line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and shrink it to something like 55. And there we go. I like that a lot better. Now I think it would be also pretty cool if we gave it a nice little background to it as well, which we can do with the outline. So first we'll give it a nice size. Usually you'd want to do a little less than half. So let's do something like 20. And then I'm going to change the color to a light blue. Now that might be a little too bright. You can always change it up by going like this and just adjusting with the different color wheel settings. I think that looks pretty good overall though. I like it. Let's go ahead, select out of it. And that's going to be our title text. Now we can go ahead and create the little spaceship image. And we can simply do that by selecting the Start Screen node, right click, Add Child Node, use a Sprite 2D. And then what we need to do is add an image to that Sprite 2D because as you can see on the inspector, the texture is set to empty. So again, let's go into the asset pack. I'm going to close bonus. Scroll on down to PNG. Let's locate the ships, which are going to be right here. I think a nice default ship will be the player ship 2_blue. Let's take that, drag and drop it onto texture. And there's our ship. Now we can just simply take it with our move tool and put it somewhere like right underneath it. Let's put it like right about here. Now it's up to you how big you want to make it look. I think this size is going to be the original size in game, but I think in the start screen it'll look a lot better if we increase this size. So let's go to the transform, and then you can edit things such as the position, rotation, scale, and skew. Let's change the scale to something like 3. Now I think that might be a little too big, so I might decrease it to 2. And there we go. Now there is something else you can do to make it a little more clear, is if you go to texture, change filter from inherit to nearest, it might make it a little bit more clear or a little bit more pixelated. I think I like that a little better though, so I am going to keep it. I might move it up just a bit with the move tool. But there we go, that's our image. So now we just need that play button. So let's go ahead and create the play button. Let's right click on Start Screen, Add Child Node. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a node 2D for this, for the main node of the button. And we're just going to call this button play. Then, of course, we need to add the image for the button, so let's right-click, Add Child Node. Now again, we could use a Sprite 2D, but as we know, when we want to scale it to certain positions, especially if we want to make it something like a nice rectangle, that's going to mess up the sizing. So what we want to do is we want to change that to something that can scale with it. So what we're going to do is we are going to look for something called a 9 patch rect. All right. This is going to help scale it a little better, especially with its pixels. So let's go ahead and add that in. Then, of course, we need to add that texture because we have no texture. So let's go ahead. I'm going to close the PNG here. I'm going to look in the other asset pack we have, the Kenny UI pack. Let's go ahead, go to PNG. Let's locate the one we want to use. I'm simply going to use the blue one here. Let's go ahead, open this up default, scroll on down. I want to find the one with the nice border, which is going to be these ones here. Button rectangle, border. So let's take one of these, drag and drop it in here, and there we go. So now what we can do is we can use the little select tool and stretch it out to the size we want. And as you can see, some of the scaling is a little messed up still. Let's first stretch it into the size we want. Something about like that size should be good. Let's move the entire button down, just kind of in the position that we want. We can always adjust it later if we don't like it. I'm going to move it down just a bit more. Now what we can do to make sure this is scaling correctly is if you go to that 9 patch rectangle and you go to patch margins. Now this patch margins, we can go ahead and set the specific margins, because if we want to stretch this to something a lot bigger, such as something like this, as you can see, it's not stretching it correctly. So if we wanted to adjust it, we could simply set it to something like left 5, top 5, right 5, and then bottom 5. And there we go. Now, if we go ahead and stretch it, it'll stay that same pixel size by using the 5 pixels for each individual side. All right, looks good. Now let's go ahead, stretch that back to the size we want. I'm going to do something like this. And then I'm going to go ahead, take the button, and I'm going to make sure we center it nice and neat. One easy way to center it easily is just match it up with the text we have there. If it kind of matches, then you should be set. I'm going to move that back down, put it somewhere like right there. All right, looks good. Now we just need to add the text. So again, we're going to right click on button play, add child node. We're going to add another label. So let's add that there. Let's make sure we add the label to match up with the actual node itself. There we go. Now we can go ahead and add the text. I'm going to say play. Of course, though, we need to add the font and then change the color. So let's first center it up real quick, just like we did before. Let's give it a new label setting. Let's go ahead, add that font in we used before. And again, that's going to be inside of the other asset pack. So let's locate that in the bonus. Take the future text, drag and drop it in. All right, looks good there. Now we just need to change the color and increase the size. I'm going to change the color simply to the color black. And then I'm going to go ahead, increase the size to something like, let's do 35. That might be too big, might not. I think it looks good overall though like that. I like it. Now this font doesn't scale really well, I think personally. I think it's a little bit too much to the left. So if we want to move it a little bit more to the right, we can simply just do it like that by just readjusting it. It won't change anything in the button, so you're okay adjusting it. Now the last thing we need to add to the button is the actual button node. That gives it the ability to be actually clicked. So let's go ahead, right click on button play. Let's go ahead now and add a button node. Now this button node, we need to match it up with the image itself. So let's go ahead, stretch it to the same size as the button. There we go. But as you can tell though, it is darkening it out, and I don't really like that view of it. We can easily change that by going down to the theme in control and simply change that theme type variant to flat button. All right, and that will do that. But there is one issue with this though, and you're going to see this in just a second. Let's save what we have and let's start the current scene. Now, if you like this, you can keep it, but I personally do not like it. If you select this button, it's going to have this like white ring around it. And I don't really think that works for every type of button, so I usually like to take that away. Now, what we could do to take it away is simply go ahead, select that button node again. Let's go ahead to theme overrides. Let's go to styles, and that focus one is set to empty, which is going to make that default white ring. You can go ahead and select that, go to new style box flat, select it again, and simply change this BG color to all the way of a value down here to the 99900, which will make it invisible and no longer be present. Of course, if you wanted to change the color of it, you could do that too over here, but I think it looks really well if we just turn it off completely. So let's go ahead, save that real quick, start current scene again, select it now, and there's no longer that white ring around it. Perfect. All right, let's close that there, close that there. Last thing you need to do though, whenever you create a button, it's best practice to actually give it a unique name. So we have button, we'll just say play. Now, it only needs to be unique from other buttons. So even though we have a main node of button play, it's perfectly okay to name it the same as the node itself. But if we have other buttons, we don't want to name them button play, such as the choose button we will create, and of course the mute button, and then the restart button. We need to make sure that they are not the same. Let's close that real quick. Save what you got. Looking good so far. Let's continue on to the next UI. Let's go ahead now and select our choose screen one. So what we can do to make sure we aren't overlapping each other, we can make this start screen invisible by selecting this toggle visibility button. Now it still exists, but it's no longer going to be visible, so we can focus on the current one we have. There's a couple things though I want to carry over into this screen, which is specifically the ship and also the button. So what I'm going to do first is take that Sprite 2D, Control D, drag and drop it into the choose screen, but we're going to have multiple ships that we can select. So I'm also going to right click on the choose screen, add child node, add a node 2D, simply call this ships. Then we'll simply take that Sprite 2D, drag and drop it into there, change the name, we'll call this ship 1. Because we know this is going to be the ship 1, let's go ahead, Control D, change the name ship 2. Then of course we can change the actual image. I'm going to go ahead and locate the ship 2 image I want to use inside of our asset pack. Let's go ahead, take the one we want. I think the player ship 1 will be good for this one. Let's drag and drop it in there. Perfect. What we could also do is turn off the other one to see how it looks by itself, just like that. I like it. Turn that other one back on. Let's go ahead, Control D. Let's do the third one now. We're going to go ahead, change this to ship 3. Let's choose a third ship we want to use. So scroll on down to locate the other blue one, the player ship 3. Drag and drop it into the texture, and there we go. All right, I like it. Now for now, I'm going to turn off ship 2 and ship 3 because eventually we'll have a script that goes and selects visibility of whichever one we have selected. We're also eventually going to have this really cool mimic of what the lasers are going to look like with each individual ship. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. All right, now we just need the buttons. So let's go ahead, let's add another node, or better yet, so we don't have to restart the entire process of creating a button, let's simply take our button play that we have and duplicate it and just drag and drop it into our choose screen. Now, what we got to do, of course, is rename a couple things, such as the main name of the node. Let's call this button choose. That will be the button we do when we want to choose the specific ship. Let's also make sure to change the name of the button node here. So button choose as well. And then change the text, select it, change that to the word choose. I'm also going to go ahead and just lower this button just a bit because we're going to have other buttons, of course, for selecting the type of ship we want to use. But easily enough, we can go ahead and select the button choose, Control D, and just reuse this same button. So we'll call this button ship 1. Then all we got to do is readjust the size. So let's take that 9 patch rect. Let's go ahead and just adjust it a bit. Let's go ahead, do something like that size, maybe a little bigger, about half the size of the original one. There we go. Then of course we need to readjust the text. So I'm going to take that text and just readjust it. Now it might not fit because we have, of course, bigger letters there. I'm going to go ahead and call this one Ace. That'll be our first ship. Again, readjust it. There we go. Then, of course, change the name. So button, and we'll call this ship 1. Then we need to place the position of the ship 1 button, and I'm simply going to move it up and then to the left. It's up to you how you want to design this, but I think this looks pretty good. All right, next up, let's create the next one. Let's save that button there, select it, Control D, button ship 2. Don't forget to change the actual button node name as well to 2. Of course, change the label as well. Let's call this one tank. Hopefully we can fit it. Looks like we can. Then just simply take that entire button, move it on over. Make sure it's in the center. Let's go ahead, create the final one. Let's take the button ship 2, Control D, change the name simply to button ship 3. Don't forget to change the inner node of the button to 3 as well. And then, of course, change the label. Let's call this one Zap. And then go ahead, take that entire button and simply move it on over to the right. And we can make it about the same. I'm just going to move it over to about there, and that should be good. All right, and there we go. That should be our choose screen. Now eventually we're going to add, of course, some other things in here to spawn the different types of lasers that you can do to showcase the player what each ship can actually do. But that looks good for now. Let's go ahead, close up each one of these, save what you got, looking good. All right, let's wrap up this UI with the final 2 screens. These ones are pretty easy. So let's go ahead, start off with the in-game screen. So I'm going to turn off the choose screen. And if you remember, all we're going to have in here is a simple mute sound button on the top left. So let's go ahead. Let's simply take one of our current buttons we have, like button ship 3, Control D on it, simply drag and drop it into our in-game screen. I'm going to close up that one there. Let's change this to button mute. Then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to change the actual label real quick. Let's do something really easy, such as just an X, which will represent, of course, turning it off. Now, we might want to change the actual symbol here, specifically the font, because that doesn't really necessarily look like an X, I think. So let's go ahead into the label settings. Let's go ahead and right-click on it real quick. We want to make sure to make it unique because it might change all the other ones, and I don't want that to happen, so make sure you do make unique. Then we're going to go ahead, go to font. We can remove the current font by the delete key. Oops. Or better yet, we can go over here, select the drop-down arrow, clear. There we go. And there's the little X. All right. So then what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of this real quick, something a little bigger. Let's do something like 55. And I'm going to move it up a bit because it's not centered correctly. Then we can shrink the entire button node itself. So I'm going to take that node. We want to make this real nice and small. And then up a little bit more. Then we can, of course, recenter the text. I'm going to go ahead, up a bit more. You might have to scale it just a little bit more this way. And then a little bit more this way. Perfect. Select away and you should see it. Now, one thing though I do want to do, this is just a personal preference, is I don't like making it completely visible when it's in game. I want to make it a little bit transparent. So we can select the 9 patch rect. We can go ahead to the visibility, and on modulate, what we can do is select it and simply decrease the A value. And I want to decrease it about this much, okay? Just so it's somewhat invisible, all right? And you can do the same thing with the label. If you want to select label, you can go ahead, go to the visibility again, go to modulate, and just decrease it a bit, just to make it look a little bit faded out so it doesn't block any of the player's view. All right. Now, because we need to tell whether or not we have it muted or don't have it muted, I want to make 2 labels actually. So we have our label on, and then we're also going to have our label off. Okay. So let's go ahead, Control D. Now label on, we will keep it as X, and label off, we can go ahead and change it to an O or a 0. And that'll help tell the player whether or not, of course, mute is on or off. So I'm going to change that simply to an O. Then to see it, go ahead and make the other one visible. And then, of course, the other one just like that. All right, we'll keep the on one on first. And then what we got to do, of course, is position it correctly. So let's take the button mute, move it to the top left corner. You could put it on the right if you want. That's up to you. I just think it looks a little better like this. And the last thing we got to do before we forget is, of course, readjust the button ship. So let's take that. Let's go ahead, readjust it there. And then we also, of course, have to change this to button, and then we can go ahead and simply make this button mute. And there we go. That's our mute button. Then we can go ahead now and create the last one. That one's going to be pretty similar to the start screen. So let's close that real quick. Let's go ahead, make our in-game screen invisible. Now for our game over screen, all we need is simply game over text, and then of course the main menu button. So let's go ahead and we're simply going to take the things we have from our start screen, such as the label. Let's take that, drag and drop it into game over screen. I'm simply going to change this to game over. Now I don't exactly want it to be the same color as the title. We could also make it smaller or bigger, but we got to make it unique. So let's right click on the label settings, make unique, select it, go to font, go to outline. I'm going to change that background color to red, signifying that's kind of like a bad thing. All right, so we'll say game over. You could also add something like an exclamation point. That's up to you, but I think it looks really good. Now we of course need the main menu button, or just menu for short, which I might do. I'm going to take that button play, Control D, drag and drop it to the game over screen. And I'm simply going to go ahead, change the name of the button from button play to button menu. Don't forget to change the actual button node name as well to button menu. And then let's go ahead, change the text. You can change it from play to something like menu. And the last thing we could do, this is up to you, I think I might do it, is match the button color to, of course, the text. And we can simply do that by locating the button we want to use inside the Kenny UI pack. Go to PNG, locate the red one now, default, and scroll on down to where you have the button rectangle and simply drag and drop it into the 9-patch rect. And there we go. All right, I think that looks pretty good so far. I like it. All right. Now one thing we could do to just verify that everything is going to work correctly is go through each one. We know the start screen works because we already tested it out. Let's go ahead and test out the choose screen. So let's save what we got, start current scene. Let's make sure. Looks like the scaling of the buttons was incorrect for the smaller ones, so we can adjust that, but everything else looks good. Let's close that. Let's readjust those real quick. Let's go ahead into each of the button. Simply go ahead and just readjust that to match it up while holding down Control. It'll snap in place. Do that for each one real quick. Let's take each one and this one here. And there we go. All right. So let's go ahead now and do this one over here. Start current screen. Let's make sure we can select the mute button, which we can. Looks good. And then the final one, of course, is the game over screen. Let's test that one out as well. Looks great. All right. Let's close everything up. Let's close our asset packs up as well. Keep things nice and neat. Let's close up the UI. Save what we got. And we're looking good.